In the grand halls of Eldoria's ancient palace, where marble statues of long-dead kings cast shadows over polished floors, a single moment would shatter centuries of royal tradition. Lady Isabella Morwen, once the kingdom's beloved darling and heir to the throne, found herself face to face with the cold steel of her own royal guard's sword. The woman who had danced at 100 royal balls, who had smiled gracefully through diplomatic dinners, and who had been groomed since birth to wear the crown, now stood accused of the one crime that could strip her of everything: treason against her own father, the king. But this was not a story of a simple palace coup or family rivalry. This was the unraveling of a web so intricate that it had taken 20 years to weave, involving foreign spies, ancient bloodlines, and a secret that could topple not just a throne but an entire kingdom. As the heavy bronze doors of the palace dungeon clanged shut behind her, Isabella knew that the real battle was just beginning. The crown she had been born to inherit was slipping away, but the truth she was about to uncover would prove far more valuable than any jeweled circlet. What started as whispers in the servant quarters about strange midnight meetings and coded letters would soon explode into a scandal that would make noble families flee in the night and cause neighboring kingdoms to mobilize their armies. The future queen's fall from grace was only the first domino in a chain reaction that would reshape the political landscape of three kingdoms forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Eldoria's royal palace as Lady Isabella Morwen made her way through the grand corridors toward her father's private study. Her silk slippers whispered against the cold stone, a sound she had grown accustomed to over her 25 years of life within these walls. The golden threads woven through her emerald dress caught the light streaming through the tall windows, creating patterns that danced across the portraits of her ancestors hanging on the walls. Isabella had always found comfort in those painted faces, each one telling a story of duty, honor, and service to the crown. King Aldrich the Bold, who had expanded Eldoria's borders to the eastern mountains, Queen Lyanna the Just, who had established the kingdom's first laws protecting the common people, her own great-grandmother, Queen Victoria the Wise, whose diplomatic skills had prevented 3 wars and secured trade agreements that still benefited the kingdom today. But this morning, those familiar faces seemed to watch her with different eyes. There was something in their painted gazes that made her stomach clench with unease. Perhaps it was the letter she carried, hidden beneath the folds of her dress, that made everything feel different. The letter that had arrived 3 days ago, bearing a seal she didn't recognize, and words that had kept her awake every night since. The palace bustled with its usual morning activity. Servants hurried past carrying silver trays laden with the king's breakfast, their heads bowed in respectful acknowledgement as they recognized her. Guards stood at attention at every major intersection of corridors, their polished armor reflecting the morning light. Everything appeared normal, yet Isabella could sense an undercurrent of tension that seemed to permeate the very air. She paused outside her father's study, her hand hovering over the heavy oak door. King Edmund Morwen had ruled Eldoria for 30 years, ever since the death of her grandfather when she was merely 5 years old. He was a fair and just king, beloved by his people and respected by neighboring monarchs. Isabella had grown up watching him navigate the complex world of royal politics with wisdom and grace, and she had always assumed she would follow in his footsteps when her time came. The sound of raised voices from within the study made her hesitate. Her father was not alone, and whoever was with him seemed agitated. Isabella pressed her ear to the door, a habit she had developed as a curious child and never quite outgrown. "Your Majesty, the situation is becoming untenable," came a voice she recognized as belonging to Lord Chancellor Marcus Blackwood, her father's most trusted advisor for over 2 decades. "The letters we've intercepted suggest that the network extends far deeper than we initially suspected." "How deep, Marcus?" Her father's voice was heavy with fatigue, a tone Isabella rarely heard from the man who had always seemed invincible to her. "Deep enough to reach the very heart of the court, Your Majesty. We believe there may be traitors among the noble families, possibly even within the royal household itself." Isabella's blood turned cold. Traitors in the court? The letter hidden beneath her dress suddenly felt like it was burning against her skin. She fumbled for it with trembling fingers, pulling out the parchment that had arrived with her morning tea 3 days prior. The letter was written in an elegant hand, the kind taught to noble children across the continent, but it was the content that had shaken her to her core. "Lady Isabella, your true heritage awaits your discovery. The crown you wear will never truly be yours until you understand the lies upon which it rests. Meet me in the old chapel at midnight tomorrow if you seek the truth about your mother's death. Come alone, or remain forever in ignorance. A friend who shares your blood." The letter was unsigned, but something about it felt authentic in a way that terrified her. Her mother, Queen Catherine, had died when Isabella was 10 years old, supposedly from a fever that had swept through the kingdom that winter. But Isabella had always sensed there were things about her mother's death that no one discussed. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room, and a sadness in her father's eyes that went beyond normal grief. What of Lady Isabella? Lord Blackwood's voice drew her attention back to the conversation within the study. Does she know anything about this? There was a long pause before her father answered. Isabella is innocent in all of this, Marcus. She must remain so, for her own protection and for the security of the realm. If what we suspect is true, then her very life may be in danger. But, Your Majesty, if the bloodline questions are accurate— Enough! Her father's voice cut through the air like a blade. Isabella is my daughter and the rightful heir to this throne. Whatever games our enemies are playing, whatever lies they're spreading, that fact remains unchanged. Isabella stepped back from the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard throughout the corridor. Bloodline questions? What could that possibly mean? She was the king's daughter, born to Queen Catherine within the sacred bonds of marriage. The entire kingdom had celebrated her birth, and she had grown up knowing she would one day rule Eldoria. But the doubt that had been planted by the mysterious letter now grew stronger with every word she overheard. Why would someone claim to share her blood if they weren't family? And what truth about her mother's death could be so important that a stranger would risk contacting the future queen directly? The sound of chairs scraping against the floor indicated that the meeting was ending. Isabella quickly moved away from the door, ducking into an alcove behind a massive stone pillar. Just as the study door opened, Lord Blackwood emerged first, his usually composed face drawn with worry lines. He was followed by Sir Thomas Aldridge, the captain of the Royal Guard, whose hand rested unconsciously on the hilt of his sword. Her father appeared last, looking older than his 53 years. The crown of Eldoria, which he wore even for private meetings, seemed to weigh heavily on his greying head. His shoulders, once broad and strong from years of training with the kingdom's finest knights, now carried a burden that appeared to be crushing him slowly. Sir Thomas, I want the guard doubled around Lady Isabella's quarters, her father instructed quietly, and I want to know everyone she speaks with, everywhere she goes. If these threats are real, she cannot be allowed to become a target. Of course, Your Majesty. Should we inform the Lady Isabella of the increased security? No. Let her believe it's merely a precautionary measure due to the upcoming harvest festival. She has enough to worry about with her royal duties. The three men walked away, their conversation fading as they moved toward the main hall. Isabella waited until their footsteps could no longer be heard before emerging from her hiding place. The corridor suddenly felt vast and empty, as if the very walls were keeping secrets from her. She returned to her chambers in a daze, her mind spinning with questions and fears. The rooms that had been her sanctuary since childhood now felt like a beautiful prison. The four-poster bed with its silk canopy, the writing desk where she penned letters to foreign dignitaries, the wardrobe filled with gowns suitable for every royal occasion. Everything remained exactly as it had been that morning, yet everything felt different. Isabella dismissed her ladies-in-waiting, claiming fatigue, and sat by the window that overlooked the palace gardens. Below, gardeners tended to the roses that would soon bloom for the harvest festival, their movements peaceful and rhythmic. It was a scene she had watched countless times, finding comfort in its predictability. But today, even the familiar sight of the garden couldn't calm her racing thoughts. The letter crinkled in her hands as she read it again. Someone was claiming to share her blood, someone who knew secrets about her mother's death. The rational part of her mind insisted it was likely a trap, an attempt by enemies of the crown to lure her into danger. But another part of her, a part that had always sensed hidden truths lurking beneath the surface of palace life, whispered that this might be her only chance to learn what really happened to her mother. As afternoon faded to evening, Isabella found herself unable to concentrate on any of her usual activities. She attempted to review diplomatic correspondence but found the words blurring together. She tried to practice her harp, a skill that usually brought her peace, but her fingers refused to find the right strings. Even her evening meal, prepared by the finest cooks in the kingdom, tasted like ash in her mouth. The palace staff began their evening routines as darkness fell. Servants lit the countless candles and oil lamps that would keep the corridors illuminated through the night. Guards changed shifts with military precision, their armor clanking softly as they took up their positions. The familiar sounds of the palace settling into its nighttime rhythm should have been comforting, but Isabella found herself analyzing every sound,
wondering if it might signal danger. As the clock in her chamber chimed 11 times, Isabella made her decision.
She could not live with the questions that tormented her, could not rule a kingdom while fundamental truths about her own identity remained hidden. If this mysterious correspondent truly had answers about her mother's death and her own heritage, then she had to take the risk of meeting them. She dressed carefully, in a simple dark cloak, the kind worn by servants when they ventured outside the palace walls. Her golden hair, which marked her as unmistakably royal, she tucked beneath the hood. The old chapel the letter mentioned stood in the eastern courtyard, a building that had once served the royal family but had fallen into disuse over the past decade. It would be deserted at this hour, but that also meant she would be truly alone if this proved to be a trap. The corridor outside her chambers was dimly lit, with only every third torch burning to conserve oil during the night hours. Isabella had explored every inch of the palace during her childhood, and she knew dozens of routes that would allow her to reach the chapel without encountering the main guard posts. She had used these passages for innocent adventures as a child, never imagining she would one day use them for something that felt dangerously close to espionage. Moving like a shadow through the darkened hallways, Isabella made her way toward the eastern wing. The stone floors felt cold even through her soft shoes, and every small sound seemed amplified in the silence. She passed beneath portraits of her ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her movement through the darkness. What would they think of their descendants sneaking through the palace like a thief in the night? The old chapel stood at the end of a courtyard filled with overgrown herb gardens. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colored patterns on the cobblestones below. Isabella paused at the entrance, her hand on the heavy wooden door. Once she stepped inside, there would be no turning back. Whatever truth awaited her in that sacred space would change her understanding of everything she had believed about her life. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped into the chapel. The interior was darker than the courtyard, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the ancient windows. The stone altar at the far end stood empty, its carved surface worn smooth by centuries of use. Wooden pews lined the space, their surfaces covered with dust and fallen leaves that had blown in through cracks in the walls. "Lady Isabella." The voice came from the shadows near the altar, soft and feminine, but carrying an authority that made Isabella straighten instinctively. "I wondered if you would come." A figure stepped into the pale moonlight, revealing a woman of perhaps 40 years, dressed in the traveling clothes of a minor noble. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and her face bore lines that spoke of both wisdom and sorrow. But it was her eyes that captured Isabella's attention. They were the exact shade of green as her own, a color she had been told was rare and distinctive to the royal bloodline. "Who are you?" Isabella whispered, though part of her already suspected the answer. The woman smiled sadly, and Isabella saw her own features reflected in that expression. "My name is Lady Margaret Sinclair, and I am your aunt. Your mother's sister, who was told you died with her 25 years ago." The chapel fell silent except for the sound of Isabella's sharp intake of breath. Everything she had believed about her identity, about her family, about her very existence, hung in the balance of what this woman would say next. The crown of Eldoria suddenly felt not like her birthright, but like a burden she might have no right to carry. Outside the chapel, unknown to both women, a figure in royal guard uniform melted back into the shadows, having heard enough to know that the kingdom's greatest crisis in 3 centuries was about to begin. The future queen's midnight meeting would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of Eldoria, and by dawn, nothing would ever be the same again. The revelation hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall. Isabella stared at the woman who claimed to be her aunt, searching for any sign of deception in those familiar green eyes. The moonlight streaming through the stained glass cast an ethereal glow over Margaret Sinclair's face, highlighting features that were indeed remarkably similar to Isabella's own. "That's impossible," Isabella whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "My mother had no sisters. The royal genealogists have documented every branch of our family tree for centuries." Margaret stepped closer, her expression filled with a mixture of hope and heartbreak. "The royal genealogists documented what they were told to document, child. Your mother, Catherine, was indeed my sister, but we were separated when we were children. She was chosen to be raised as a noble, destined for marriage to your father, while I was hidden away to protect a secret that could have destroyed the kingdom." Isabella's hands trembled as she gripped the back of a dusty pew. What secret could possibly justify separating sisters? The secret of your true lineage, Isabella. The secret of who you really are and why your life has been in danger from the moment you were born. Margaret's voice carried the weight of years of carefully guarded truth. Your mother and I were not born into nobility. We were the daughters of a kitchen maid named Sarah, who served in the court of King William, your grandfather. The chapel seemed to spin around Isabella as the implications of Margaret's words sank in. No, that can't be true. I've seen the marriage documents, the genealogical records, all carefully fabricated to hide the truth. Margaret reached into her cloak and withdrew a small, worn leather pouch. Your mother saved these before she died, hoping that one day you would learn the truth about your heritage. From the pouch, Margaret extracted several items: a simple silver locket, a letter written in faded ink, and what appeared to be a birth certificate, though the parchment was yellow with age. She held them out to Isabella, who hesitated before taking them with shaking hands. The locket was plain, nothing like the elaborate jewelry Isabella was accustomed to wearing. Inside, she found a tiny portrait of two young girls, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, with the same green eyes that she saw in her own reflection every morning. One of the girls bore an unmistakable resemblance to the portraits of her mother that hung in the palace. That was painted when Catherine was 9 and I was 11, Margaret said softly. A traveling artist did it for a few copper coins. It was the last picture we had taken together before our lives changed forever. Isabella's fingers traced the delicate features in the portrait before turning her attention to the letter. The handwriting was her mother's. She recognized it from the few personal notes her mother had left behind. But as she read the words, her understanding of her entire existence began to crumble. My dearest Margaret, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone. And the time has come for Isabella to learn the truth. I pray that she will forgive me for the deception that has shaped her entire life. Our father was not Lord Thomas Ravencrest, as the records claim, but a stable master named John who loved our mother Sarah with a devotion that transcended class boundaries. When Sarah became pregnant, she knew that bearing children out of wedlock would mean death for both her and her babies. But fate intervened in the form of King William's desperation for an heir. Isabella looked up from the letter, her face pale as moonlight. What does this mean? Margaret's expression was grave as she continued the story. King William's only legitimate son had died in battle, and his queen had passed away years earlier without giving him another heir. The kingdom faced a succession crisis that would have plunged Eldoria into civil war. Your grandfather was a pragmatic man who understood that the survival of the kingdom was more important than pure bloodlines. But how does that connect to my mother? Your grandfather needed a solution that would appear legitimate to the nobles, while securing the throne. He discovered that your mother Catherine bore a striking resemblance to portraits of his late queen as a young woman. More importantly, she possessed the intelligence and grace necessary to convince the court that she was of noble birth. Margaret paused, letting the weight of her words settle. So he created the fiction of House Ravencrest, complete with false documents and paid witnesses, and arranged for Catherine to marry your father, Prince Edmund. Isabella sank into the nearest pew, the full scope of the deception overwhelming her. So my father, does he know? Your father believes what he was told. That he married Lady Catherine of House Ravencrest for political alliance and happened to fall genuinely in love with her. The truth was hidden from him to protect both him and you. If he knew that his wife was of common birth, it could have delegitimized your claim to the throne and potentially sparked the very civil war your grandfather sought to avoid. The birth certificate in Isabella's hands confirmed Margaret's story. It listed Catherine as the daughter of Sarah, kitchen maid, and John, stable master, born in a small village 50 miles from the capital. There was no mention of nobility, no coat of arms, no indication that this woman would one day become a queen. Why are you telling me this now? Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why risk everything to reveal a secret that has been hidden for decades? Margaret's expression darkened. Because the secret is no longer safe. Someone else knows the truth. Someone who intends to use it to destroy you and potentially overthrow the kingdom. Your mother didn't die of fever, Isabella. She was murdered to prevent her from revealing the truth when she learned that our secret had been discovered. The chapel fell silent except for the sound of Isabella's rapid breathing. Her mother, murdered? The gentle queen who had read her bedtime stories and taught her to play the harp, killed to protect a lie? Who would do such a thing? Someone with ambitions for the throne and the resources to uncover deeply buried secrets. We believe it was Lord Chancellor Blackwood, though we've never been able to prove it. Margaret's voice carried years of suppressed anger. He discovered the truth about your mother's origins and realized that if he could expose it, he could delegitimize your father's marriage and potentially claim the throne for himself through his own distant royal connections. Isabella remembered the conversation she had overheard that morning between her father and Lord Blackwood. The man she had trusted as her father's advisor, who had been present at nearly every important event in her life, might be the person responsible for her mother's death. But why hasn't he revealed it? Why wait all these years? Because exposing the truth would have been pointless while your grandfather lived. King William had the authority and respect to weather almost any scandal. But now, with a kingdom that faces threats from neighboring rulers and internal political tensions, the revelation that the royal bloodline is not pure could provide the spark needed to ignite a revolution. Margaret reached into her cloak again and withdrew another document, this one bearing official seals. 3 weeks ago, Lord Blackwood sent agents to the village where your mother was born. They've been questioning elderly residents, searching church records, gathering evidence that could prove your illegitimate claim to the throne. Isabella studied the document, recognizing some of the names as villages in the eastern province. How do you know all this? Because I've spent the last 15 years building a network of loyal supporters who understand that your mother's true nobility came not from her birth, but from her character and her service to the kingdom. Some of the palace servants remember Sarah and John. Some of the older nobles suspected the truth, but chose to support your grandfather's decision because they believed it was in Eldoria's best interest. The weight of conspiracy and counter-conspiracy made Isabella's head spin. Her entire life had been built on a carefully constructed lie, yet that lie had brought peace and prosperity to the kingdom. Her mother, a kitchen maid's daughter, had become one of the most beloved queens in Eldoria's history. But now that noble deception was being used as a weapon against her. What happens now? Isabella asked. If Lord Blackwood reveals the truth, what becomes of me, of the kingdom? Margaret's expression was determined. That depends on choices you make in the next few days. We can flee the kingdom tonight, travel to the southern provinces where supporters await us. You can abdicate your claim to the throne and live quietly as a private citizen. Or you can stay and fight for a crown that may not be yours by blood, but which you have earned through your dedication to Eldoria's people. Isabella stood and walked to one of the tall windows, looking out over the moonlit courtyard toward the palace that had been her home for 25 years. In those stone walls lived thousands of servants, guards, and nobles who depended on the stability of the crown. Beyond the palace walls lay a kingdom of farmers, merchants, artisans, and scholars who trusted their future to the royal family. There's something else you need to know, Margaret said quietly. Lord Blackwood isn't working alone. We have evidence that he's been corresponding with Prince Victor of Ravencrest, the neighboring kingdom that has long coveted Eldoria's trade routes. If they can prove that your claim to the throne is illegitimate, Victor can press his own claim through his distant connection to your great-grandmother's line. The political implications struck Isabella like a physical blow. This wasn't just about exposing a family secret, it was about foreign invasion disguised as a succession dispute. If Lord Blackwood succeeded in his plan, Eldoria could find itself absorbed into the Ravencrest Empire within months. "Show me the evidence," Isabella demanded, her voice gaining strength as the full scope of the threat became clear. Margaret produced another document from her seemingly endless supply of hidden papers. This one was a letter written in a masculine hand, bearing the seal of Prince Victor of Ravencrest. The contents were damning. Detailed plans for supporting Lord Blackwood's claim to the throne, promises of military assistance if needed, and agreements for territorial concessions that would effectively end Eldoria's independence. How did you obtain this? Your mother wasn't the only one who anticipated that this day might come. She spent years placing loyal servants in strategic positions throughout the kingdom and even in foreign courts. When she died, those people transferred their loyalty to you, even though you didn't know they existed. Isabella felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow for the mother she had never truly known. Queen Catherine had been far more than the gentle, sheltered noble Isabella had believed her to be. She had been a protector of the kingdom, a spy master, and a strategist who had worked tirelessly to secure her daughter's future. "There's one more thing," Margaret continued. "Tomorrow night, Lord Blackwood plans to present his evidence to the Noble Council. He's convinced 3 of the 5 council members that immediate action is necessary to preserve the kingdom's integrity. If they vote to remove you from the succession, your father will have little choice but to comply or risk civil war." The timeline gave Isabella less than 24 hours to decide the fate of her kingdom. She could run, abandoning the crown but potentially saving her life. She could stay and fight, risking everything on the chance that she could expose Lord Blackwood's treachery before he destroyed her. Or she could attempt some middle course that might satisfy neither her conscience nor her responsibilities. "What would my mother do?" Isabella asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Margaret smiled for the first time since their conversation began. Catherine would fight for her people, regardless of the personal cost. She would never allow foreign powers to claim what she had spent her life protecting, even if that protection required sacrifice. Isabella nodded slowly, feeling the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders. The crown she had been born to inherit might not be hers by blood, but the kingdom she had been raised to serve was still populated by people who deserved protection from those who would exploit them for political gain. "Then we fight," she said, her voice carrying a new authority that surprised even her. "But we fight smart, the way my mother would have. What resources do we have?" Margaret's expression shifted from hopeful to businesslike. "Your mother's network includes key servants throughout the palace, several minor nobles who suspect Lord Blackwood's true intentions, and Captain Miranda Sterling of the Palace Guard, who has been investigating irregularities in security protocols for weeks." "Captain Sterling knows about this?" "Not everything, but she's noticed the guard rotations have been altered to place Lord Blackwood's allies in crucial positions tomorrow night. She's also discovered that several foreign agents have been granted access to the palace under false diplomatic credentials." Isabella felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The increased security around her quarters that her father had ordered wasn't just protection. It was also positioning Lord Blackwood's supporters to control her movements when the time came to act against her. "We need to warn my father," Isabella said, but Margaret shook her head. "Your father is already under surveillance by Lord Blackwood's people. Any attempt to communicate with him directly could trigger immediate action against both of you. We need to be more subtle, more strategic." Isabella thought of her father's tired face, the weight he had been carrying in recent days. He was fighting an enemy he didn't know existed, trying to protect a daughter whose true heritage he didn't understand. The loneliness he must feel, bearing the responsibility of the crown while surrounded by people he couldn't fully trust, struck her with unexpected force. "What do you propose?" Margaret outlined a plan that was both audacious and elegant. Rather than trying to prevent Lord Blackwood's presentation to the noble council, they would let it proceed, but not before ensuring that the council also received evidence of his treasonous correspondence with Prince Victor. The revelation that he was working with foreign powers would undermine his credibility and potentially turn his own allies against him.
"It's risky," Margaret admitted.
"If we fail to present the evidence effectively, or if Lord Blackwood's support is stronger than we believe, you could find yourself arrested for treason by dawn." Isabella considered the alternatives. Flight meant abandoning her people to foreign domination. Inaction meant watching helplessly as decades of her family's work crumbled. The choice was clear, even if the outcome was uncertain. "My mother died protecting this secret," Isabella said finally. "I won't let her sacrifice be meaningless. We proceed with your plan." As the church bells of the capital chimed midnight, the two women began to plan a campaign that would determine not just Isabella's fate, but the future of an entire kingdom. In the shadows outside the chapel, the guard who had been watching melted away into the darkness, carrying news that would set the final phase of Lord Blackwood's plan into motion. The die had been cast, and by tomorrow's sunset, either Isabella would emerge as the true Queen of Eldoria, or she would be facing charges of treason that could cost her everything, including her life. The crown's shadow was lengthening, and soon it would either shelter her or crush her beneath its weight. Dawn broke over Eldoria with deceptive serenity, painting the palace walls in shades of gold and rose that belied the storm gathering within. Isabella had not slept. Instead, she had spent the remaining hours of darkness reviewing documents, memorizing faces of allies and enemies, and preparing for what might be the most important day in the kingdom's history. Margaret had departed before first light, melting away into the city to coordinate with their network of supporters. Isabella found herself alone in her chambers, surrounded by the familiar luxury that now felt like a beautiful cage. Every tapestry, every piece of silver, every silk cushion represented not just her royal status, but the carefully constructed lie that had shaped her entire existence. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. "Enter," she called, quickly concealing the documents Margaret had given her beneath a pile of correspondence. Her lady-in-waiting, Elena, entered with the morning tea service, her usual smile replaced by an expression of barely concealed worry. Elena had served in Isabella's household for 7 years, since she was a young woman newly appointed from one of the minor noble families. But as Elena set down the silver tray, Isabella noticed something different about her movements, a deliberation that suggested she carried more than just breakfast. "Your Highness," Elena said quietly, "there are matters we must discuss." Isabella studied the young woman more carefully. Elena's dark hair was pulled back more severely than usual, and there was a tension in her posture that spoke of secrets held and decisions made. It was then that Isabella noticed the small silver pendant at Elena's throat, bearing a symbol she had seen once before. In the documents Margaret had shown her the night before. "You're part of my mother's network," Isabella said, not asking but stating a fact. Eleanor's relief at not having to maintain the pretense was visible. "Yes, Your Highness. I was placed in your household specifically to watch for signs that the secret was in danger of being exposed. That time has come."
Isabella gestured for Elena to sit in the chair beside the window, abandoning the formal protocols that usually govern their interactions.
"What have you learned?" "Lord Blackwood met with foreign agents at 3 different locations throughout the city last night."
Captain Sterling's people observed him at the Silver Swan Inn, the old warehouse district, and finally at a private residence in the Noble Quarter. The last meeting didn't end until just before dawn. The implications were troubling. If Lord Blackwood was meeting with foreign operatives so openly, it suggested he felt confident that his plan would succeed within hours. Either he had more support than Margaret believed, or he was preparing for immediate action regardless of the Noble Council's decision. "There's more," Elena continued. 3 ships flying Ravencrest colours were spotted anchoring in Thornley Bay, approximately 6 hours' ride from the capital. Officially, they're carrying a diplomatic mission to discuss trade agreements. Unofficially, our people report seeing soldiers boarding those ships in full armour. Isabella felt her stomach clench. Prince Victor wasn't just supporting Lord Blackwood's political manoeuvring, he was preparing for military intervention if necessary. The neighbouring prince clearly intended to claim Eldoria's throne, whether the succession question was resolved legally or through conquest. How many soldiers? Conservative estimates suggest at least 300 per ship, possibly more. That's nearly 1,000 troops within striking distance of the capital. Elena's voice remained steady, but Isabella could see the fear in her eyes. "Your Highness, if Lord Blackwood's plan fails, Prince Victor appears ready to take Eldoria by force." Isabella stood and moved to her window, looking out over the peaceful courtyard where gardeners were already tending to the flower beds. Below, life continued as normal. Servants hurried about their duties, guards maintained their posts, and the business of the palace proceeded without any indication of the crisis brewing in its very heart. "What of my father? Does he know about the ships?" King Edmund received reports of the diplomatic mission but was told nothing about the military escort. Lord Blackwood controlled the information that reached His Majesty, presenting it as routine trade negotiations. Elena paused, choosing her words carefully.
Your Highness, there's something else.
"Captain Sterling believes that your father is being slowly poisoned." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow.
She spun around to face Elena, her face pale with shock.
"What? Nothing dramatic or immediately fatal, but Captain Sterling has noticed changes in His Majesty's behavior over the past few weeks."
Increased fatigue, moments of confusion, difficulty concentrating during long meetings. The symptoms are consistent with small, regular doses of certain plant extracts that would weaken without killing. Isabella's mind raced back to recent interactions with her father. She had attributed his tiredness to the stress of ruling, his occasional distraction to the normal burdens of kingship. But if Elena's suspicions were correct, Lord Blackwood wasn't just planning to expose her illegitimate birth, he was systematically weakening the king to make him more malleable when the moment came for political manipulation. "Who has access to my father's food and drink? That's what makes this so insidious. The royal kitchen staff are all loyal, but Lord Blackwood has been present at nearly every meal for the past month, often bringing special wines or delicacies as gifts. The king trusts him completely and would never suspect that such offerings might be tainted." Isabella felt a surge of rage at the betrayal. Her father had trusted Lord Blackwood for over 20 years, had relied on his counsel during some of the most difficult decisions of his reign. The idea that this trusted advisor had been slowly poisoning him while planning to overthrow his daughter was almost too monstrous to comprehend. "We have to warn him," Isabella said, but Elena shook her head. Captain Sterling tried, indirectly. She suggested increased food testing protocols and questioned some of Lord Blackwood's recent gifts. The Lord Chancellor immediately accused her of paranoia and suggested that such measures would insult the many nobles who regularly bring offerings to the king. His Majesty supported Lord Blackwood, believing that such suspicions were unseemly. Isabella realized that Lord Blackwood had been preparing for this moment far longer than any of them had suspected. He had spent years building unshakable trust with her father, positioning himself as indispensable, while gradually isolating the king from other sources of information and advice.
"What about the Noble Council meeting tonight?" Elena's expression grew even more grave.
Lord Blackwood has convinced 4 of the 5 council members to attend a private dinner before the official session. He claims it's to brief them on sensitive matters that shouldn't be discussed in the formal chamber. Captain Sterling believes he intends to present his evidence against you during that dinner, ensuring that the council members are already convinced of your illegitimacy before any formal proceedings begin. Isabella understood the tactical brilliance of the approach. By presenting his case in an intimate setting, Lord Blackwood could control the narrative, answer questions privately, and ensure that his allies were prepared to support his position during the official session. Any attempt by Isabella or her supporters to refute his claims would seem desperate and defensive. Who is the fifth council member, the one not attending the dinner? Lord Aldred Blackstone, your mother's cousin. He's remained skeptical of Lord Blackwood's recent behavior and has been asking uncomfortable questions about the increased foreign presence in the capital. Isabella felt a glimmer of hope. Lord Blackstone was one of the most respected nobles in the kingdom, known for his integrity and his fierce loyalty to the crown. If she could reach him with Margaret's evidence before the council meeting, she might have a chance to present the truth about Lord Blackwood's treasonous activities. Can we arrange a private meeting with Lord Blackstone? Elena considered the question carefully. Possibly, but it would be dangerous. Lord Blackwood has people watching your movements, and any unusual activity could trigger immediate action against you. However, Lord Blackstone is scheduled to inspect the Eastern Watchtowers this afternoon, as part of his duties as Defense Minister. If you were to encounter him during that inspection, it might appear coincidental. Isabella began to see the shape of a plan forming. The Eastern Watchtowers were part of the fortifications that protected the capital's approach from Thornley Bay. If Lord Blackstone was conducting a routine inspection, he would be in a position to observe the Ravencrest ships himself. Seeing the military threat firsthand might make him more receptive to Isabella's warnings about Lord Blackwood's treachery. What excuse could I have for visiting the Eastern Watchtowers? The Harvest Festival includes traditional ceremonies at several locations around the capital. The ancient blessing of the Watchtowers is one of those ceremonies, typically performed by a member of the royal family. You could claim to be reviewing the arrangements for tomorrow's festivities. It was plausible, but risky. Any deviation from Isabella's normal routine would be noted by Lord Blackwood's watchers. However, the alternative was waiting helplessly while the council was manipulated into supporting her removal from the succession. A commotion in the corridor outside interrupted their planning. Isabella and Elena heard raised voices, followed by the sound of armored footsteps approaching rapidly. Before either woman could react, the door to Isabella's chambers burst open, revealing Captain Thomas Aldridge, accompanied by 6 guards in full battle gear. "Lady Isabella," Captain Aldridge said formally, his expression professionally neutral. "By order of the Lord Chancellor, you are to remain in your quarters for your own protection. Recent intelligence suggests that foreign agents may attempt to contact or harm members of the royal family." Isabella's heart sank as she realized that Lord Blackwood had moved faster than they had anticipated. The mysterious guard who had observed her meeting with Margaret had clearly reported back, and now she was effectively under house arrest. "Captain Aldridge," she said, maintaining her composure despite the panic rising in her chest, "I must speak with my father immediately. There are matters of urgent importance that require his attention." "I'm sorry, Your Highness, but His Majesty is in consultation with the Lord Chancellor and cannot be disturbed. You will be informed of any developments as they occur." Elena stepped forward, her voice carefully respectful. "Captain, surely Her Highness could receive visitors in her quarters? Perhaps members of the Noble Council could—" "No visitors are permitted without Lord Blackwood's express approval," Captain Aldridge interrupted. "These are extraordinary circumstances that require extraordinary precautions." Isabella understood that she was now completely isolated from potential allies. Lord Blackwood had used his authority as Lord Chancellor and the King's trust in his judgment to effectively imprison her while maintaining the fiction that it was for her own protection. Any attempt to resist or demand her freedom would be portrayed as evidence of guilt or foreign influence. As the guards took positions outside her door and in the corridor, Isabella realized that the final phase of Lord Blackwood's plan had begun. He would spend the day ensuring that all potential opposition was neutralized, then present his evidence to a carefully prepared audience. By the time the Noble Council convened officially, her fate would already be decided.
"Yelena," she said quietly, knowing that her lady-in-waiting would also be watched carefully. "I find myself quite tired from the stress of these security concerns. Perhaps you could ensure that my afternoon rest is not disturbed." Elena understood immediately. "Of course, Your Highness."
"I'll make certain that you have complete privacy for your rest period." As Elena left to make arrangements with the guards, Isabella realized that she had perhaps 2 hours before her confinement would become absolute. During that time, She would need to find a way to contact her allies, get word to Lord Blackstone, and potentially save not just her own position, but the independence of the entire kingdom. The irony was not lost on her that she, who might not be the legitimate heir by blood, was the only person in position to prevent Eldoria from falling under foreign domination. Her mother's common birth, which Lord Blackwood intended to use as a weapon against the crown, had inadvertently created the very network of loyal supporters that might save the kingdom from conquest. Isabella moved to her writing desk and began composing what might be her last act as the future queen of Eldoria. If she could not leave her chambers to fight for her throne, then she would have to find another way to ensure that the truth reached those who needed to hear it. The battle for Eldoria's future would be fought with words and evidence rather than swords and armies, but it would be no less decisive for all that. Outside her window, the morning sun climbed higher into a clear sky, but Isabella knew that by sunset, either she would emerge victorious, or the kingdom she loved would be lost forever. The crown's shadow was darkening, and soon it would either shield her people or become the tool of their oppression. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Isabella's chamber windows as she carefully reviewed the letter she had spent hours composing. Every word had been chosen with precision, every phrase crafted to convey maximum information, while appearing innocent to casual observation. If her plan worked, this single piece of parchment would reach Lord Blackstone and potentially save the kingdom. If it failed, it might serve as her confession before facing charges of treason. Elena had returned 2 hours earlier with news that chilled Isabella to the bone. The guards had been instructed that no correspondence was to leave the royal chambers without Lord Blackwood's personal review. Her writing materials were to be monitored, and any attempt to communicate with the outside world would be reported immediately. The Lord Chancellor was systematically cutting off every avenue of escape or resistance. But Elena had also brought something else, a small vial of ink that appeared black, but would reveal different text when heated. It was an old trick used by intelligence networks, something Isabella's mother had apparently taught to her most trusted servants. The visible letter appeared to be routine correspondence about Harvest Festival arrangements, but when warmed, it would reveal the true message about Lord Blackwood's treachery and the foreign threat. "The kitchen staff have confirmed our suspicions about His Majesty," Elena whispered as she helped Isabella prepare the letter for delivery. Cook noticed that Lord Blackwood's wine gifts always came with specific instructions about serving temperature and timing. When she tried to taste one yesterday to ensure quality, she felt dizzy and nauseous within minutes. Isabella felt her hands tremble with rage as she sealed the letter with her personal insignia. Her father, the man who had dedicated his life to serving Eldoria, was being slowly poisoned by the person he trusted most. The betrayal was so monstrous that Isabella struggled to comprehend how Lord Blackwood could maintain his facade of loyalty while systematically destroying the royal family. How will this reach Lord Blackstone? Elena's smile was grim but determined. "Your mother prepared for many contingencies. The kitchen staff have maintained contact with their counterparts in various noble households for years. Tonight's dinner preparations will require deliveries to several locations, including Lord Blackstone's residence. A letter concerning Harvest Festival arrangements will seem perfectly normal." Isabella nodded, though she understood that they were placing enormous trust in people they barely knew. Her mother's network was proving to be far more extensive than she had ever imagined, but it was also a reminder of how dangerous the political situation had been, even during the years when everything appeared peaceful and stable. A commotion outside her chambers drew their attention to the window. In the courtyard below, a formal procession was assembling. Lord Blackwood, dressed in his finest ceremonial robes, was preparing to depart the palace with an escort of guards and several carriages filled with documents and official seals. The sight filled Isabella with dread as she realized he was beginning the final phase of his plan. "He's going to the Noble Council early," Elena observed. "Captain Sterling warned us that he might call an emergency session if he felt threatened." Isabella watched as her father appeared in the courtyard, looking pale and unsteady but dressed in his formal royal attire. King Edmund moved slowly, requiring the support of his personal aid, and Isabella could see from his distant expression that the poisoning was affecting his mental clarity as well as his physical strength. "My father doesn't even realize what's happening to him," Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion. "Lord Blackwood has made him a puppet in his own kingdom." Elena placed a comforting hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Your Highness, there may still be time. Captain Sterling has positioned loyal guards at strategic points throughout the palace and the council chamber. If Lord Blackstone receives your message and acts on it, we might be able to expose Lord Blackwood's treachery before the council votes."
Isabella turned from the window, her expression hardening with resolve. And if Lord Blackstone doesn't receive the message, or if he doesn't believe it, then we proceed with the contingency plan.
The contingency plan was desperate and dangerous.
If all else failed, Captain Sterling would attempt to arrest Lord Blackwood on charges of treason during the council session itself. The evidence of his correspondence with Prince Victor would be presented publicly, forcing the council to confront the foreign threat regardless of questions about Isabella's legitimacy. But such dramatic action would likely result in violence, and there was no guarantee that Sterling's loyal guards could overcome Blackwood's supporters in a direct confrontation. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. "Enter," Isabella called, expecting to see one of the guards checking on her confinement. Instead, a young servant girl entered, carrying a tray of afternoon refreshments. Isabella didn't recognize her, but Elena stepped forward with obvious relief. "Your Highness, this is Mary, one of the kitchen staff who has been loyal to your mother's memory." Mary curtsied awkwardly, clearly nervous about being in the presence of royalty. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but Cook sent me with urgent news. The foreign ships in Thornley Bay have started moving toward the harbour. They should arrive by nightfall." Isabella felt her stomach drop. Prince Victor was accelerating his timeline, probably in coordination with Lord Blackwood's presentation to the council. If the political manipulation succeeded, the foreign prince could claim to be invited to help restore legitimate rule to Eldoria. If it failed, he would have 1,000 soldiers within striking distance of the capital to impose his will through force. Has anyone informed the military commanders?
Mary shook her head.
Lord Blackwood sent orders that all military communications must be approved through his office first. General Morrison and Admiral Hayes have been told that the ships carry only diplomatic personnel, and that any military preparations would be seen as hostile acts against a friendly power. Isabella realized that Lord Blackwood had been systematically neutralizing Eldoria's defenses for weeks. By controlling information and using his position as Lord Chancellor, he had prevented the kingdom's military leadership from recognizing the threat until it was too late for effective resistance. "Mary, can you get word to General Morrison directly? Not through official channels, but through the same network that brought you here?" The young servant nodded eagerly. "Cook has a cousin who works in the General's household. We can get a message to him before evening." Isabella grabbed a piece of parchment and quickly wrote instructions for the general to prepare for potential military action while maintaining the appearance of normal security protocols. If Prince Victor's forces attempted to land, Eldoria's army needed to be ready to respond immediately. As Mary left with the message concealed in her apron, Isabella found herself pacing her chambers like a caged animal. Everything now depended on people she had never met, servants and guards and minor nobles who had pledged their loyalty to her mother years ago, and were now risking their lives to protect a daughter they barely knew. "Elena, tell me about my mother's network. How did she build such extensive connections without anyone noticing?" Elena settled into a chair, her expression thoughtful. "Your mother understood something that many nobles never learn, that real power often lies not with those who wear crowns, but with those who serve them. She made friends among the kitchen staff, the stable hands, the seamstresses, the guards. She learned their names, asked about their families, helped them when they faced difficulties." Isabella felt a pang of recognition. Her mother's genuine kindness, which Isabella had always attributed to noble character, had actually been part of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to protect the kingdom from threats both foreign and domestic. More than that, though, she understood that people like Cook and Captain Sterling, and even young Mary, have family members and friends throughout the kingdom and beyond. A kitchen maid's brother might be a merchant who travels to foreign courts. A guard's wife might work in the household of a rival noble. Your mother spent years building a web of relationships that could provide information and assistance when needed. The genius of the strategy struck Isabella with sudden clarity. While Lord Blackwood had focused on manipulating the formal power structures of the kingdom, the noble council, the royal advisors, the official military hierarchy, her mother had built an alternative network based on personal loyalty and mutual assistance. It was a system that could survive political upheavals and operate even when traditional channels of communication were compromised. A distant sound of horns drew Isabella's attention back to the window. The sun was beginning to set, casting the palace in golden light that would soon fade to darkness. In the courtyard, torches were being lit in preparation for the evening's activities. Somewhere in the city, Lord Blackwood was presenting his evidence to the noble council. Somewhere on the harbour, foreign ships were preparing to land troops on Eldorian soil. "Elena, whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that serving in my household has been an honor. If this plan fails and I'm arrested for treason,
Make sure that you and the others who help me can escape safely.
Elena's response was immediate and fierce.
Your Highness, with respect, we're not serving in your household because of protocol or duty. We're here because we believe in what your mother stood for and what you represent. The blood in your veins may not be royal, but your heart belongs to Eldoria in ways that Lord Blackwood's never could.
The words struck Isabella with unexpected force. She had spent the day worrying about her legitimacy, about whether she had the right to claim a throne that might not be hers by birth. But Eleanor was right. Her dedication to Eldoria's people was real, regardless of her parentage. The crown might be a symbol of inherited authority, but true leadership came from service and sacrifice.
A commotion in the corridor announced the arrival of Captain Aldridge with a formal escort. Isabella and Elena exchanged glances, knowing that this could be either rescue or arrest, depending on which side had prevailed in the political maneuvering of the afternoon. "Lady Isabella," Captain Aldridge announced as he entered, "you are requested to attend an emergency session of the Noble Council. Your presence is required immediately."
Isabella studied the captain's expression, trying to determine whether he was acting under Lord Blackwood's orders or responding to new developments. His formal tone revealed nothing, but she noticed that the guards accompanying him were not the same ones who had confined her earlier in the day.
"Captain, may I ask what has prompted this emergency session?" "Grave matters concerning the security of the kingdom have come to light, my lady. The council requires your testimony regarding certain allegations that have been made."
Isabella understood that the moment of truth had arrived. Either Lord Blackstone had received her message and convinced the council to investigate Lord Blackwood's treachery, or Lord Blackwood had successfully presented his evidence, and she was about to face formal charges of illegitimacy and treason. As she followed Captain Aldridge through corridors that suddenly felt foreign and threatening, Isabella realized that her entire life had been leading to this moment. The crown's shadow would soon either lift to reveal the truth, or fall across her and the kingdom she loved, potentially destroying everything her mother had worked to protect.
The great doors of the council chamber loomed ahead, their ancient wood carved with symbols of justice and royal authority that had guided Eldoria for centuries. Behind those doors lay either vindication or destruction, and Isabella walked toward them with the knowledge that she carried not just her own fate, but the future of an entire kingdom in her hands.
The final battle for Eldoria's soul was about to begin. The council chamber had never felt so imposing as Isabella entered through its massive oak doors.
The circular room, designed centuries ago to emphasize equality among the noble houses, now seemed like an arena where her fate would be decided by forces beyond her control. Torches flickered in wall sconces, casting dancing shadows that made the carved stone faces of ancient kings appear to watch the proceedings with stern disapproval. The 5 members of the noble council sat at their traditional crescent-shaped table, their expressions grave and unreadable. At the center sat Lord Aldred Blackstone, his weathered face showing the strain of whatever revelations had prompted this emergency session. To his right, Lord Blackwood occupied his usual position as Lord Chancellor, but Isabella noticed immediately that something had changed in his demeanor. Gone was the confident authority he had displayed that morning. Instead, he appeared cornered, his eyes darting nervously between the other council members. King Edmund sat in the royal chair positioned slightly apart from the council table, and Isabella's heart clenched at the sight of her father. He appeared more frail than ever, his usually sharp eyes clouded with confusion and fatigue. The poisoning had clearly accelerated, and Isabella realized that Lord Blackwood must have increased the dosage to ensure the king would be too weakened to effectively defend his daughter. "Lady Isabella," Lord Blackstone's voice carried across the chamber with formal authority. "You stand before this council at a moment of extraordinary crisis for our kingdom. Grave allegations have been made regarding both your legitimacy as heir to the throne and the loyalty of those who serve the crown." Isabella straightened, drawing upon every lesson in royal bearing she had ever received. "My lords, I am prepared to answer any questions that serve the good of Eldoria." Lord Blackwood rose from his seat, his face flushed with what appeared to be desperate anger. "Your Highness, with the greatest respect, this pretense has gone on long enough. I have presented irrefutable evidence to this council that you are not the legitimate heir to this throne, that your entire bloodline is built upon lies and deception that threaten the very foundations of our kingdom." Isabella felt her heart pound, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Lord Chancellor, those are serious accusations. I trust you have equally serious evidence to support them?" "Indeed I do." Lord Blackwood gestured to a table laden with documents, scrolls, and what appeared to be official seals. "Birth records from the village where your mother was truly born.
testimony from witnesses who remember Sarah the kitchen maid and her bastard daughters, genealogical evidence that proves the House of Ravencrest never existed. The words hung in the air like poison, and Isabella saw several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. But before she could respond, Lord Blackstone cleared his throat and spoke with unexpected authority. Lord Blackwood, before we continue with these allegations, I believe it would be appropriate to address certain other evidence that has come to our attention this evening. Lord Blackwood's confident expression faltered slightly. My Lord Blackstone, what other evidence could possibly be relevant to evidence of correspondence between yourself and Prince Victor of Ravencrest, detailing plans to support your claim to the throne of Eldoria in exchange for territorial concessions that would effectively end our kingdom's independence? Lord Blackstone's voice was steel wrapped in silk, and Isabella felt a surge of hope as she realized that her message had reached him successfully. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Lord Blackwood's face went from flushed to pale in a matter of seconds, and Isabella could see his mind racing as he tried to formulate a response to this unexpected development. That correspondence was taken out of context, Lord Blackwood stammered. Prince Victor approached me with offers of support, but I was merely gathering intelligence on foreign threats to the kingdom. Lord Blackstone produced a leather portfolio from beneath the council table and withdrew several documents. Intelligence gathering that involved promising Prince Victor control over our eastern trade routes. Intelligence that included detailed maps of our defensive positions and plans for removing key military commanders who might resist foreign influence. Isabella watched as the other council members reviewed copies of the correspondence, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror to outrage. The evidence was damning, far more comprehensive than she had hoped. Margaret's network had clearly provided Lord Blackstone with everything necessary to expose Lord Blackwood's treachery. Furthermore, Lord Blackstone continued, his voice gaining strength. We have received word from General Morrison that foreign ships bearing significant military forces are approaching our harbour under the pretense of diplomatic mission. Ships that you, Lord Blackwood, specifically instructed our military commanders to treat as friendly vessels requiring no defensive preparations. King Edmund stirred in his chair, appearing to focus on the proceedings for the first time since Isabella's arrival. Marcus, he said, his voice weak but carrying the authority of 3 decades on the throne. Is this true? Have you been in correspondence with foreign powers? Lord Blackwood's composure finally cracked completely. Your Majesty, everything I have done has been to protect this kingdom from the chaos that would result if the truth about Lady Isabella's parentage became known. The bloodline must be pure, the succession must be unquestionable, or we face civil war. So you decided to hand our kingdom over to a foreign prince instead. The voice belonged to Lord Marcus Aldridge, one of the younger council members, and a man known for his fierce patriotism. You would destroy our independence to preserve your version of legitimacy? Isabella realized that the moment had come for her to speak, to address not just the accusations against her, but the larger questions about leadership and loyalty that would determine Eldoria's future. My lords, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, Lord Blackwood speaks of pure bloodlines and unquestionable succession, but I would ask you to consider what truly makes a rule illegitimate. Is it the accident of birth, or is it dedication to the people they serve? She moved toward the center of the chamber, addressing the council, but speaking loudly enough for her father to hear every word. If the allegations about my mother's birth are true, and I will not insult your intelligence by denying evidence that appears compelling, then my claim to this throne rests not on bloodline, but on the 25 years I have spent learning to serve Eldoria's people.
I have studied our laws, our history, our traditions.
I have walked among our farmers and merchants, our soldiers and scholars. I have dedicated my life to understanding what this kingdom needs to prosper. Lord Blackwood attempted to interrupt, but Lord Blackstone silenced him with a sharp gesture. Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. My mother, whether born in a palace or a peasant's cottage, became one of the most beloved queens in our history. She brought peace to warring factions, prosperity to struggling regions, and hope to people who had lost faith in their leaders. Her nobility was earned through service, not inherited through bloodlines. She turned to address her father directly. Your Majesty, you chose to marry my mother not just for political alliance, but because you recognized her character, her wisdom, and her love for this kingdom. That choice brought you happiness and brought Eldoria stability. If that choice was based on carefully constructed fiction, rather than genealogical fact, does that diminish its value? King Edmund's eyes seemed to clear slightly as he focused on his daughter. Isabella, my dear child, whatever the circumstances of your birth, you have been the greatest joy of my life, and the brightest hope for this kingdom's future. Lord Blackwood made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. Your Majesty, sentiment cannot override law. If Lady Isabella is illegitimate, then the succession must pass to the next rightful heir, which by your genealogy would be yourself, through your distant connection to the royal line. Lord Blackstone interrupted. How convenient that your investigation of Lady Isabella's legitimacy should result in your own elevation to the throne. The room fell silent as the full scope of Lord Blackwood's ambition became clear to everyone present. He had not been trying to protect the kingdom's stability. He had been orchestrating an elaborate coup that would place him on the throne with foreign support. Captain Stirling entered the chamber at that moment, her armor bearing signs of recent conflict. My lords, foreign troops have begun landing at Thornley Harbour. General Morrison requests immediate orders regarding defensive measures. Lord Blackstone stood, his expression resolute. General Morrison has full authority to repel any foreign invasion. Eldoria's independence is not negotiable, regardless of questions about succession. The other council members nodded their agreement, and Isabella felt a wave of relief as she realized that the kingdom would be defended regardless of her personal fate. King Edmund struggled to his feet, supported by his aide, but speaking with newfound clarity that suggested the shock of events had momentarily overcome the effects of the poison. Lord Blackwood, the king said, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. You stand accused of treason against this crown, conspiracy with foreign powers, and attempt to usurp the throne through deception and manipulation. You are stripped of all titles and positions, and you will be confined pending formal trial. Captain Stirling moved immediately to arrest the former Lord Chancellor. But Lord Blackwood had one final card to play. Your Majesty, even if you reject my methods, the questions about Lady Isabella's legitimacy remain. Can you truly place her on the throne, knowing that her bloodline may be common rather than royal? The chamber fell silent as everyone waited for the king's response. Isabella held her breath, knowing that her father's next words would determine not just her fate, but the kingdom's future relationship with the concept of inherited authority. King Edmund looked at his daughter with eyes that held both love and profound sadness. Lord Blackwood, you speak of bloodlines as if they determine worth, but you are wrong. Isabella's worth lies not in her ancestry, but in her character. She has spent her life preparing to serve this kingdom, and she will do so with honor regardless of the circumstances of her birth. The king turned to address the full council. My lords, if you find that questions of legitimacy require a change in succession, I will respect your decision, but I will not allow those questions to be used as justification for foreign conquest or internal tyranny. Eldoria will remain free, and it will be governed by those who love it more than they love power. Lord Blackstone rose from his seat and moved to stand beside Isabella. Your Majesty, speaking for this council, I believe we have seen enough evidence to determine where true loyalty lies. Lady Isabella may not have royal blood, but she has proven herself worthy of the crown through her dedication to this kingdom and her refusal to compromise its independence for personal gain. The other council members nodded their agreement, and Isabella felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. The battle for Eldoria's throne had ended not with swords and armies, but with the triumph of character over conspiracy, of loyalty over ambition. As Captain Stirling led Lord Blackwood away in chains and General Morrison's forces prepared to repel the foreign invasion, Isabella understood that she had inherited something more valuable than a crown. She had inherited the trust of people who valued service over bloodlines and courage over convenience. The crown's shadow had lifted, revealing not the destruction of royal authority, but its transformation into something stronger and more meaningful. Isabella would rule Eldoria not because of the accident of her birth, but because she had proven herself worthy of the responsibility through her actions and her unwavering commitment to her people's welfare. Outside the council chamber, the sounds of military preparation could be heard as Eldoria's forces mobilized to defend their independence. But inside the chamber, a different kind of victory had been achieved. The victory of truth over deception, of genuine nobility over inherited titles, and of a kingdom's right to choose its own destiny. As the crisis passed and normalcy began to return to the palace, Isabella realized that her mother's greatest gift had not been the carefully constructed fiction of royal bloodline, but the network of loyal supporters who valued character over ancestry. The crown she would inherit was not diminished by the truth of her origins. It was strengthened by the knowledge that it had been earned through service, rather than simply inherited through accident of birth. Eldoria's future stretched ahead, bright with the promise of leadership based on merit rather than bloodline, and Isabella stood ready to guide her kingdom into a new era of justice, prosperity, and genuine nobility of spirit.